at the moment we meet in special times.
Special, yeah, difficult times.
The headlines about Israel at the moment are only about violence and crime and terror. What impact has that on you as a musician from that area at the moment?
So, of course, like everyone, I don't think not just Israelis, but everyone had that initial shock and terror from the first attack of Hamas, and just to see the inhumanity and the violence and the gruesomeness of the hatred and the bloodshed was one tier of just hopelessness and shock. Then, as it escalated, and of course the expected Israeli retaliation and the other shock of that and everything that it encompasses, and just, you know, as Israelis we got used to cyclical vengeance cycles, and everybody expects when they're hurt and when they are wounded, they regress to a need of simplicity. They want to scream black and white, they want to shout us and them, good and bad, but unfortunately reality does not succumb to our need for simplicity. The world is complex and amorphous and nebulous, and I think music, that's where it comes from. Because music is an amorphous language, it's translatable. To the artist, every night I can sing the same song and find a different emotion in it, but to the audience, everybody finds their own emotional topography there. And so I think music and art in general is such a great language in order to try to break away from this cycle of violence, because what it allows us to do, if we use it correctly, not as entertainment and escapism, but as an introspective tool, then it allows us to see the fragile, wounded parts of our souls before they are turned into anger and hate. And if we can give that dignity and beauty through aesthetic, through art, then we have a chance to look in ourselves and be able to accept that fragility, and then maybe have a wider circle of empathy towards others with that fragility, and understand that we're all wounded before we are angry. And so I think music is such an important tool, and that's why I'm continuing even in these times.
We from outside see the polarization in the region, in the country of Israel, also before this time. And you come out of the artistic Israel, which is very, very fascinating. Does this other Israel still exist, your Israel?
I'm not really the person to ask. I left Israel 8 years ago, and I lived in Italy, and now I live in France. I had difficulties seeing the consensus in Israel change from centrist left to fanatic right. But it's not happening just in Israel, it's happening elsewhere in the world. Yeah, and so it's difficult times for all of us, for anyone that holds liberal views. These are times that we should be scared and we should be vigilant in order to uphold our ideologies. And so if you're asking me if that part still exists in Israel, I can only say that I hope so. I see, and tonight we're not having a merch stand because it's not the place to have a merch stand, but in our merch stand, since the attack began, I'm working in order to show places where polarization didn't split communities apart. So I'm working with two organizations, one called Warriors for Peace, and one is called the Forum of Grieving Families. And they're both Israeli and Palestinian families or ex-soldiers, militants working together now without weapons, with dialogue, in order to build some kind of dialogue that might be a seed in order to grow into some kind of solution in the future. I think right now it's impossible to ask any side for empathy. I mean, we should, but just, I think biologically, it's people when they're in a survivalistic mode, they really regress to polarization. They need to feel us and them very strongly. And so right now, all you can do, it's almost like a child in a tantrum. You need to give it space, and you need to hug it and just be there and accept the fact that people are hurting on both sides, and try to transmit love and support to everybody. At a certain point, we need these dialogues to start happening more seriously and to be pushed in a way that the consensus goes back a bit to an understanding of dialogue. And maybe the sheer scope and the sheer horror of these attacks might be such an earthquake that maybe people will use them as a tool to go back and revisit their ideas of how to move forward in order for a solution. Not just for, even if you're not in for humanity, even if you're just thinking about yourself, I think this is a pragmatic way to have safety in the end.
Absolutely. I read that you also have been in the army.
For sure,
and
a shorter time
a shorter time. And what I read was that you started to play the guitar there.
That's true, that's true.
Why?
What happened is there was an overwhelming avalanche of emotions that I didn't know how to explain to myself. I didn't have the language, I didn't have the tools. And I found poetry. So I would go to guard duties in the night, you know, and I had 6 hours to kill and there was nobody. I was in the desert. And I would just read poetry, Hebrew poetry mainly. And I started writing down my own poetry to try to describe these feelings. And then when I got home every 2 weeks or so for a weekend, I would take the guitar and compose that. And it helped me, because writing it down was not enough, but hearing myself speak these words out loud, it's almost something like Freudian psychoanalysis. When you regurgitate this thing, hearing yourself speak it and understanding it, that was very therapeutic to me. And that's why I started writing songs.